All right, Charlie, what do you really think about Allegheny College?
Terrific place.
And your favorite fraternity is?
My favorite fraternity is Phi Gamma. Oh, sorry, Phi Delta Theta.
Good thing we have the benefit of editing that stuff.
All three of my children went there, and two of them married Alleghenians.
There you go.
And Margaret's father and mother went there. Her grandfather and her grandmother went there. So that we're true Alleghenians. I was on the board of trustees. So true Alleghenians.
How did that happen?
Well, I got a invitation to go see the dean of law school, who happened to be Owen J. Roberts, a retired Supreme Court justice. He was our dean for a couple of years, and I was editor-in-chief of the Law Review, and he said he had a proposition for me, and the proposition was if I would clerk for a year with Judge Goodrich of the Third Circuit, then I would probably clerk for Justice Burton, because they had had almost a tradition of that. And that's what happened. I clerked for Judge Goodrich for a year in the Third Circuit, and then I went to clerk for Justice Burton. Well, Justice Burton had, we gave him cert memos, and we divided the cert petitions evenly. Every other one, or at least we just worked on them until they were finished, and each of us would send a cert memo to Justice Burton, and then if cert was granted, then we would write a memo to him based on the briefs on the merits. And I guess we called that the argument memo. So if I did the cert memo, then I would do the argument memo, and and John Douglas would do his. And if Justice Burton was assigned to write the opinion, he would say, I think he called me Chuck or Charlie, I can't remember what I was called at that time. He said, you work on a draft of an opinion you think I ought to write, and I'll work on a draft of an opinion. We'll trade. And he would sit in his chambers and write his opinion out on the yellow foolscap like you have in your hand there. And then I think it would be typed up then by Secretary Tess Cheatham, and I would type mine up and send it to him. But I can't remember one single sentence that I ever wrote in one of my opinions that showed up in one of his opinions. I think he probably had pride about not copying anything from his law clerks. And he didn't submit his final draft of his opinion to me for review or comment that I can recall.
What was the reputation of Robert Jackson as you were walking in day one?
I think he had a reputation of being a great justice and a great writer, and but I didn't have any other impression of him other than that. And his chambers were right next door to mine, ours, I think. And I did get to know Bill Rehnquist very well, and because he was Jackson's law clerk. And Bill Rehnquist and I became good friends. We played tennis together, and he came to our house and played bridge, and he was a great guy, a very friendly, gregarious guy. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I remember about Bill Rehnquist was he was obviously the only conservative among the law clerks.
Is that right?
And you've heard this before from other law clerks, but there is a law clerk's lunchroom on the basement, and that's where we would go for lunch all the time because it was free and it was good, and it was fun being with all those other guys, 18 of them. They didn't always come, but we decided the cases before the Supreme Court really decided them. And Bill Rehnquist was always on the conservative side. What do you mean violation of due process of law? This guy's guilty, isn't he? That's an exaggeration, but when we sort of take a straw vote of what we thought about a particular case, he was always on the that conservative side, just like he was on the bench. But
Is
a
it-
really nice guy, and everybody liked him. And you know, Black had a tennis court in his backyard, and I played with him once in his backyard.
Yeah.
How good a tennis player was Justice Black?
Very good for a person his age. I said I was a college player, and when I remember it very well, I should have let him win, but when God, he had me like 4-2 or 5-3 or something. I thought, I can't let a 60 or 70-year-old guy beat me at tennis, so I think I finally won it 7-5 or something like that. Not too smart. I remember seeing a lot was Frankfurter, who constantly came into our John Douglas's in my office and lobbied us for this or that.
With any impact?
Maybe on us, but not on Justice Burton.
If they had asked you to work with any justice other than Justice Burton, who would you have selected?
Well, nobody ever asked me that question, and I hadn't thought about it.
Good.
Maybe Black or Douglas, because their opinion was more consistent with my opinion on those civil rights cases and things like that. Then I decided I wouldn't want to work for Douglas because he was such a hard taskmaster, and he was not friendly to the law clerks and so forth, like the other justices were.
Mhm.
But I have to give that more thought. Black was such a kindly man, and not Frankfurter.
Why?
Well, I thought it would be much harder to be a law clerk for him. I don't know for sure, but all those lengthy appendices of his, and he always had a lengthy opinion. Always seemed to have a lengthy opinion, either as a concurring opinion or a majority opinion or a dissent. And I thought that always meant a lot more work for the law clerks. But
The thing I remember the most about my year in Washington is, and fill in the blank, what would you say?
my clerkship,
Yep.
and in particular how nice it was to clerk for Justice Burton. What a decent man he was, and how well he treated his law clerks. I think I told you of the occasion when he invited the wives to come in and meet him, and Mrs. Burton was there, and Mrs. Burton was a tall, gray-haired, impressive-looking lady
Mhm.
who had big ears, and always wore two earrings on one ear. But anyway, so we go into the justice's chamber with the wives ahead of us, and there's Mrs. Burton standing there very stately. Then one of the wives goes up to shake hands and bumps into Mrs. Burton, and she drops her false teeth on the floor. You can imagine what happened. Oh my God! Of course, it turned out they were fake false teeth. And then the next thing, they went over to shake Justice Burton's hand, and he had one of these buzzers in his hand. And that was their way of breaking the ice and letting it be known that they were not that formal people. And so that was the relationship from then on. I remember that. He and Mrs. Burton took us to the theater in Alexandria.
Wow, great.
And our second daughter was born in Alexandria. He and Mrs. Burton sent roses or something. I asked Justice Burton if it was possible he might be willing to come to dinner and meet my wife's father because he thinks you're so great. And no problem. And he and Mrs. Burton came to dinner. And I think my 2-week or 3-week-old daughter threw up all over Justice Burton's coat. Anyway, that's the kind of people their way. It was so nice to work for him, and Mrs. Burton was friendly, very friendly too. So that was the best part of it.
Yeah.
And being, I say, John Douglas being my fellow clerk, John got us involved in some Senate things, which was fun.